that's what we're going to continue to see in the future. So as 2029 approaches, we're going to see different skill sets in the acquisition workforce, as well as we're going to see potentially different competitors in the industrial base that goes out there and supports the Department of War mission, specifically the Air Force mission. I believe AFCAP VI is going to keep doing the great things that they're doing. They may have shorter notice call-ups for things that need to be taken care of.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Future of GovCon. This is a weekly podcast that we put together to bring to experts from across the industry and look at what's happening today and how it's going to impact the future. I'm Jake Frazer. I'm the owner and CEO of Precision Talent Solutions. In leading one of the industry's top executive search firms, I get to talk to influencers every day. C-suite executives, board members, growth leaders, top government officials, military flag officers. And on this podcast, what we're doing is we're bringing in these experts from AI, from space, from medical, from logistics, from engineering, and we're sitting down and talking about what's happening in their specific area of the industry and how it will impact the future. So pour a cup of coffee and let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Jake and welcome back to another episode of the Future of GovCon. And man, we have a great show for you today. We're bringing one of the most experienced contracting professionals across DoD, Department of War, but especially from the Air Force. Today we have with us as our guest, Nancy Andrews. Nancy just retired from the Air Force after an incredible career where she did everything from running essentially half of the budget for the Air Force, running all the services side. She's an SES Tier 3, which is essentially the same level protocol and everything as a 3-star general. And she has an incredible story from going from a GS2, which is like being a private first class, all the way up to an SES-3, and has really seen everything there is to see across government procurement and also Air Force contracting. Nancy, thanks so much for joining us today.
No, thanks, Jake, for having me today. It's very humbled by the opportunities I've had with the Air Force, but I'd love to be able to share some of those insights with you all today. So thank you.
So Nancy's one of our precision experts. She spoke at our expert showcase on a fantastic panel. And look, folks, if you're doing business or you're thinking about doing business with the Air Force, and a lot of you are, and a lot of you have, and a lot of you will, you need to talk to Nancy because she's done all of the services across the Air Force and had oversight for that, but she's also done a lot around research and development and sustainment in other areas across the Air Force. So if you're doing business with the Air Force, Nancy brings a tremendous amount of understanding of the entire acquisition process, the source selection process, and she can really help you navigate what to bid, how to bid better, how to win, and how to execute programs. Is that right? Is that said accurately, Nancy?
Jake, I couldn't have said it better. I've seen it all. I've seen good. I've seen the bad. I've seen what can be better. So, yeah, I can definitely help out. I've experienced the gamut of the acquisition life cycle, and I have a depth of knowledge and experience. And part of that I know we'll get into is just by being somebody who's been mobile as an Air Force civilian and moving around and experiencing what others have only dreamed of doing. I've got the great opportunity to have done that. So I've seen, like I said, I've seen the diversity of acquisition. I've seen the from the lightning bolts to the better buying power to what we now have as another acquisition reform timeframe. So reform is in our definition when we define acquisition, and I'll leave it at that and let you ask a few more questions. But
Okay, I'm not gonna ask her to read her resume. Let me hit some high points from her. From Nancy's career. Like I said, she retired as an SES Tier 3. She was the director of administration, oversaw a massive budget at kind of the headquarters level, over $5 billion a budget at the headquarters level. And prior to that, she was also the PEO for services for the Air Force and basically oversaw 51% of the Air Force budget. So you have equipment, you have services, and she ran all the acquisitions for all the services and has a tremendous career. Well educated, obviously. Went to Weber State, had a business degree there, a couple of MBAs and master degrees from National University. uh, uh, and from was it the Air University and the Dwight Eisenhower School of National Security. So, just an incredible resume. Uh, and as I mentioned, climbed the ranks from being an intern as a GS2, and because they didn't have GS1s, is basically an intern, and found her way uh, through in a fantastic career in government up to being an SES-3. So it's very impressive what you've been able to do, Nancy.
Thank you. To hit some highlights of things that really impacted my career. Like you said, I started as an intern with the Air Force. I was an intern again. So I was one for the Army as well as the Air Force. But in the Air Force, I was allotted the opportunity as an intern to move down to Patrick Air Force Base to continue to support Space Systems Center and now Command. And when I was down there, I had the opportunity to teach the acquisition process to operators who were down at the ranges who didn't understand acquisition. So to me, that was one of those pinnacle moments in my career where I had to understand my craft well enough to be able to train others. And it really helped me to learn and grow and to gain a sense of independence, which was an amazing opportunity.
They say the best way to learn is to teach, right?
Exactly. So that was a very junior part of my career, but it really taught me that one, I loved acquisition, and two, I love to understand the business as well as build the relationships and the communication process with my multifunctional team members.
Is that basically training CORs and KOs? Is that level?
Yes, the training was for the contracting officer representatives and the contracting officers that were down at Patrick Air Force Base, teaching them the acquisition process. They were very well equipped to understand the goings on at the ranges. They'd been there for years. They had the mission capabilities part of the mission down, but they needed to understand the acquisition portion of it. And that's where I came in to help them at a very junior part in my career. And like I said before, that really helped me hone in my acquisition skills because was training those that were down there. So a great part of my career that I'll always be grateful for the folks down there and grateful for the opportunity I had to help train and develop those folks.
So going back early, like growing up, you're from Utah, right? Originally,
Yep, small town, Utah, Grantsville, Utah.
and so talk about growing up. Did you have family in in the military or in government?
So all my father, as well as all my uncles on his side of the family, and my mom's two brothers, all were military veterans, mostly of the Korean and Vietnam War. My dad was a Marine, always once a Marine, always a Marine. I went to high school and then getting ready for college. I had no idea that there were civilians in the government until, when I was at Weber State, the Air Force came and said, "Hey, you want a job with the Air Force in contracting?" And I said, "Well, looks pretty good. I need a job. Getting ready to graduate here." And they came and recruited me. And of course, from a small town that I talked about, Grantsville, Utah, with no red lights until now, they've recently got a red light in the town. So going from that to they, uh, they moved me to Los Angeles Air Force Base, and, so I had to learn to be a big city girl pretty quick, but also to be autonomous on my own. So that was a big move. I was the first one in my family to go to college and, first one to move out of the 10-mile radius from where I grew up.
And at what point did you kind of decide, hey, I'll make this a career, not just a job, but a career? What happened in your what happened to make you kind of make that shift?
Initially, it was a little daunting to be away from home, but after that, when I started getting into working with the requirements owners and the program managers to understand the mission requirements, it made me more excited because I said, "Well, the FAR is a tool, and how we interpret that tool is there's a lot of different directions you can go." So we had autonomy to think independently, so to speak. But the thing that really got me energized is, after I finished my intern program, I was afforded the opportunity to go down to Air University at Maxwell Air Force Base, and I got to sit with the operators and the maintainers and the pilots, and what I learned is they said, "Thank you." And I said, "For what?" They said, "Thank you for giving us the weapon systems, the support that we need to go out and do our jobs." And to me, that was a pinnacle moment in my career where I said, "Wow, this acquisition stuff is exciting. It's never the same thing. It's not drab because you always have different personalities and different customers and different requirements that you're trying to come up with a solution." So to me, that was a really big change that said, this is what I want to continue to do, and I want to do it well. So
Did you have a chance to deploy or, I don't know, get in an aircraft, like, to get into the mission at any point during your career?
I never did deploy, but I can only tell you that I've been in different aircraft and at different sites, and that was pretty exciting, even firing weapons at times as well. So yes, that makes you really put the two and two together,
Yeah.
of the goodness of what your programs can do.
So then take us through a little bit of the career from GS to, like, some I know you spent some time, a considerable amount of time, like, an NRO. Talk about some of the agencies that you spent some time at during your career.
Sure. Well, I started out with the Army as an intern in accounting, and I quickly knew that I wasn't going to be an accountant. I didn't enjoy that type of work. So when the Air Force recruited me out of college, that was okay. I'm going to change my career focus and look at overall acquisitions. So I moved to Los Angeles as an intern. And through my 3 years, I did get a move to Patrick Air Force Base, still supporting Space and Missile Systems Center at the time in LA. So 2,600 miles away from leadership, doing my job, learning and continuing to learn and grow. But then I got offered the opportunity to go back to Los Angeles to work a major acquisition program. So I would tell you, very junior in my career, I was working source selection after source selection after source selection. So when you mentioned that I have that acquisition background, I became the FAR 15 expert at the time. That was the major acquisition regulation in the federal acquisition breaks that promoted how you do acquisitions. So I learned quickly how to do acquisitions. I became the first GS-12 to go for my unlimited contracting officer warrant, and I successfully obtain that in Los Angeles because I always knew that why am I not making the decisions? It wasn't because I think that highly of myself, but when you get into the work and you're sitting side by side with your program managers and your engineers, you want to make those decisions without having to go, Mother, may I, to your boss. So I was afforded the wonderful opportunity to have leadership that saw my abilities to do a good job and gave me the autonomy to go out and do the things I needed to do to support my program offices. So getting that warrant was a big milestone in any contracting officer's career. And so I obtained that when I was working a major source selection, so as a GS-12. But at that time, I knew I needed to understand my mission and more holistically and how we, as an Air Force, fit into the overall with the other services in the department, as well as how we fit the national defense strategy with our diplomats and our intel and our economic environments, right? The dime. So I went to Air Command Staff College, like I mentioned, down in Montgomery. Everybody thought I was crazy. Why you moving to Alabama? But as a civilian, it was a 10-month TDY. And I got to live in the international officer quarters there, and I had the best housekeepers. This lady she was she was about 75 years old, so I would do all my own cleaning, bring my own towels and linens, so all she had to do is come in and visit with me for a few minutes. But she was the sweetest lady. The other thing about being at Montgomery, if you don't know, is the prison down there. They do all the janitorial work and stuff, so they do all the cleaning. So that was quite the experience to be down there for 10 months.
From LA to Alabama.
So that was an interesting transition, as I went from Los Angeles Air Force Base to the National Reconnaissance Office. I was anticipating I was hired in at the same level, being a first line supervisor and holding an unlimited contract and officer warrant. But as I got to the National Reconnaissance Office, I was told, wait a minute, we want you to get your feet wet, understand the way we do business here before you go pursue the opportunity to get your unlimited contract and officer warrant. But I was insistent that they put me in front of a board, that I would be just fine. I could pass their board and I would be able to help them in the way that I was aiding the Department of the Air Force before I left. So they let me take my warrant board, which was great, and I passed with flying colors. I'm not doing that to not be humble when I say this, but sometimes in your career, you have to take those times and you have to be clear on what your goals are and make sure they understand that you're there to help and you have a certain level of responsibility and you're willing to take it. So that was very helpful uh, to me throughout my career. And this was just another part of it. But the National Reconnaissance Office was a great place to work. We had a lot of opportunities to do things faster and to help the warfighter in a much more timely manner. So, what a great opportunity.
Excellent. So
Eh,
you spent some time also in the Air Force Materiel Command, is that right? In the sustainment
Yes.
center?
Yeah, so coming out of the NRO, I went to school. I went to the Eisenhower School to focus in on the national defense strategy, where you get to go to school with several federal agencies outside of Department of War. So it gave me a bigger perspective of how we all play into keeping our country strong, both economically and having the defense as a deterrent to keep our democracy alive. So it was very interesting. I find some of my best friends were from the Department of State because I thought, wow, they're so knowledgeable and they know so much about these countries and why we're doing what we're doing and how we respond. So I learned so much from that year. But after that, I got promoted into the senior executive service and started working for Air Force Materiel Command up at Hanscom Air Force Base, where we did a lot of the C4ISR work. So we got to touch, all weapon systems, both space and Air Force. And at the time, we were still one service. We hadn't divided in between Space Force and Air Force. So that was a great opportunity. It gave me the opportunity to lead over 200 acquisition professionals, learn to work their growth and development. Think about that. Sit on the developmental teams with the rest of the Air Force contracting leadership, making sure we were taking care, excuse me, of not only our military, but our civilians and how we deliberately develop and train our future leaders. So that was an amazing opportunity out there.
I know you're passionate around the leadership topic, probably, I mean, super passionate about it. What was it like going from being a kind of a doer, a contracts, procurement, acquisition person into leading a pretty sizable organization? What was the shift like for you from being a doer to a leader?
So that made me really sit back and have to focus on how much do I empower my people? Because when I was growing through the ranks, I didn't want somebody always having telling me how to do things. I wanted to have the top cover of my leadership, but I wanted the autonomy. So it was hard for me coming from a doer to be in that leader that gave them the top cover and made sure they had the tools to do their job. Right. I wanted to make sure I had the right people on the right jobs supporting the mission, and I also wanted to do the protection to make sure my folks were treated well with all the multifunctional team members that were out there. So you're absolutely right. That was really a pivotal time in my career again, is to learn how to be that leader versus the doer.
And then you did a little bit of time at the sustainment center as well. Is that right?
I did. So, yep, I was at Hanscom for just over 2 years. My father had passed away, so the Hill Air Force Base job, lead contracting job, was open, and my leadership gave me the opportunity to get closer to home to help out the family, but also to learn sustainment, which was very interesting. I said the first time in my Air Force career, I'd been there over 20 years, and now I'm starting to actually work on aircraft. So, it was an amazing mission. I understood very much the limitations and the challenges with our sustainment portfolios, how we're keeping our aging weapon systems going, and how the parts obsolescence and where you buy your parts from. There's a whole gamut of issues and challenges, and I also realized when I was on the development side, I should have paid more attention to the sustainment of the house. So it really gave me a better perspective of how you should run your programs across the department, but also how we got through some of our challenging times. So yes, I worked at Hill Air Force Base for 3 years, and then I moved to take the lead role for Air Force Sustainment Center at, Tinker Air Force Base, so I had Robins and Hill portfolios under me as well, because General Litchfield liked what I was doing at Hill and pulled me over to lead at Tinker Air Force Base.
What time period was that, Nancy? What year?
Uh, in my career, from 2014 to 2016, I moved to Tinker Air Force Base and worked with General Litchfield, who was really big on art of the possible and trying to figure out why our weapon systems were in the hangars too long and weren't out there being deployed and supporting our warfighters. So, what an amazing leader he was, and the opportunity to learn and grow from him was amazing. I did find out though that my office had a private stairwell from his office up, so he did surprise visits quite often. But that was great because I knew he relied on me and I could provide him the business expertise and advice that he needed to continue making Air Force Sustainment Center more productive than it had been in the past.
Yeah, with the secret passageway, that helps.
Yeah, that was
Uh,
pretty awesome.
and then you've had, I mean, a big chunk of the latter part of your career was essentially overseeing all the acquisition around services, right, in the Air Force. And I think a lot of people see the Air Force budget and they think of, big airframes and systems, but so much is in the services side. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Over 51% of our Air Force budget was spent on services, and that's why my position was established back in the early 2000s. They established the senior service manager requirement for all the services so that we could govern and make sure that we were managing our service spend correctly. And then the Air Force took it another step and they created the program executive officer as well to do the acquisition and the execution of those large service programs for the Department of the Air Force. So I was afforded that opportunity after I left the Sustainment Center. I worked there for 8.5 years. Some of my big takeaways from that position was that services are very, very different across. It's not just your base operating support, but it's running the test ranges, it's doing air base, air defense, it's doing the contracting augmentation support in our AFCAP contract. We were doing the adversary air programs. So we spent billions of dollars doing a lot of things that directly support the warfighter. So there is a big misnomer when we think about the budgets and the spend across our Department of War, but a lot of that money is services, which really helps keep the weapon systems flowing. But one of the big takeaways as well when I got to that job was we didn't have the workforce, the skill sets that we require from our weapon system portfolios. I went in there and found out pretty quickly we didn't have a lot of program management support. We didn't have education training to train folks on how to manage these programs, as well as we didn't have training for the contracting officer representatives that are the ones watching the success or failure of these contractors doing their job. So, part of my mission was to go to all the MAGCOM commanders who are my counterparts and talk to them about putting the right people in those jobs, just like we would for a pilot. We would have pilots that are trained to do their job before they get in the cockpit. So why wouldn't we do that with our acquisition folks that are spending a lot of your money and critical warfighter support? Why wouldn't we have the right people in those jobs? So those were two of my takeaways is I was involved with a lot of big programs that needed to be successful. And we needed to get on those and get the right strategies. And at the same time, we needed to deliberately develop and train the workforce to support those programs.
I was listening to a podcast you did in 2019. You're talking about this challenge about just having the right people they can go out and deploy and do the mission. But the other thing you talk about is when budgets would get tight, the service would want to cut the support services because they didn't want to touch the platforms themselves. And so, but that's kind of counterintuitive, right? To try and cut back budgets on the services side because it would have a negative impact on the actual platforms.
Right, because all the platforms depend on support from contractors that are the expertise that have worked these missions from maybe sometime when they were in uniform to now in their civilian state, and others with that expertise. And you don't get that anywhere, and you need that support to keep those missions running, especially as you mentioned overseas.
So you're running half the budget for the Air Force. Um, and uh, and towards over the recent years, and probably towards the end of that, as we shifted into this new world of acquisitions, streamline acquisition. You've been watching this for years evolve, and a lot of people say it's not new. The procurement reform that's going on isn't new. It's just a lot more intense. Um, what do you think are the two or three main changes that you see happening now around Air Force acquisition?
I see the main changes right now with acquisition focused on delivering that that requirement in a more timely manner and accepting those risks, right? Understanding what your risk posture is, but taking on those risks. It's about getting industry involved earlier, right?
Right.
Industry, it's not about building those big platforms. It's about having to be innovative and build those platforms that are more flexible and delivering on a more, in a different pace, delivering earlier and maybe not the complete system, but being flexible enough where you can pivot and you can change and continue to outpace the adversaries. So that's a critical one. And the other thing is going more commercial like, right? Especially if you think about cyber and your IT and your space, it's about going more commercial like so you can get those platforms developed and out to the warfighter sooner. And you can also bring in more industry than was possible in the past because some of these commercial industries that didn't have the opportunity to play with the government are coming in now through organizations such as DUIX and others that are kind of building that bridge to bring those major investors and commercial entities into the platform to continue to keep an industrial base so that we can be able to continue to support our country and go out there in conflict as needed.
I remember on
And we've
our
seen that a lot more lately
Yeah.
with the buildup of the artillery and stuff and helping with Ukraine and getting our pipelines of production going again.
That's key. I remember at our the panel we did at our expert showcase, something you said. You talked about trust as acquisition becomes faster and more complex, which it is now. How trust is like a strategic differentiator um, for industry. And how how do you how do you build that? How do you build that trust factor? If you're a company out there wanting to do business with the Air Force, how do you build that trust?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Trust comes with building those relationships. Trust doesn't happen overnight, but trust comes with getting those contract awards and showing that you can deliver. And if you're and bad news doesn't get better with time. So it's about making those commitments and being able to carry out those commitments. Not just responding to these proposals, delivering a proposal. You need to deliver the capability that we've asked you to deliver, and that trust comes with that. It comes with your being involved early, understanding the operational side of the house, getting involved with helping us when we send out those requests for information or those draft RFPs out there that we get the feedback from industry that you understand the requirement and then coming up with the capability and the posture to deliver those requirements. And again, deliver. Deliver is the key.
Got it
Deliver on
forever.
time.
Let me ask you a question, just a skeptical question. A lot of companies spend a lot of time writing responses to RFIs and white papers. When you get those, do you look at who's providing those, and does that kind of go into your mind like this company's always providing really quality feedback, and does that weigh how you look at them as they bid on stuff?
Yes. So from my perspective, when we get those RFIs, we took those seriously. We looked at those. We knew there were certain companies that would have really good responses. There was other companies that would continuously bring us a marketing spill. But those feedbacks when asked for and presented from industry are very important because sometimes the government's not the smartest folks out there. Our warfighter understands what they need, but to interpret that into a request for proposal that we get a proposal back, um, that's challenging. And so to get that help and perspective, because what we don't want to do is throw garbage over the fence and have industry try to interpret that and then give us garbage back, right? We're on timelines. Our warfighter deserves those capabilities when they're needed.
So it is worth the time and effort that companies are investing into those responses after all.
It is, and I say that because I've heard all across the department, whether it's across the Air Force or other federal agencies, there's independent thought. There's some organizations that will take the time to review those and the importance of those. There's others that don't do due diligence. I would say it's always interesting when there's personalities involved, but from my perspective and what we're taught and what we're told to do is to be able to, bring that industry, thought into the process and understand it.
Keep submitting those RFI responses, huh?
Absolutely. So when I talk about the need for industry to be more flexible and adaptable as we look forward and innovation and other things come into play, but a big part of industry's support to the government is going to be in those relationships. First and foremost, it's going to build those relationships. You start building those relationships by responding when the government team asks you for inputs. RFIs have traditionally been a little interesting from an industry perspective. We've gotten a lot of feedback that, hey, you're asking us for the entire proposal before you're actually issuing the requirements, the official requirements. Why are you doing that, government? As well as we're asking for proprietary data. What I would say is that's a communication space. So respond to those RFIs, go to your government program offices, go to the requirements owners, and really understand those requirements so you can respond to them when the official requirements come out. But if you don't respond, it's a sign that you're not engaged or you're not helping the government. Because really, what the government team's looking at when we issue those requests for information is we're looking for information. We may have it totally wrong, but without industry's feedback, we won't get that information until potentially it's too late. So it's a win-win for both parties if we get involved early and often, and the RFI is one of those communication paths to get to the program office.
Good. Good advice for our audience. There a couple of current things. Talk about this change that's going on. I'm not sure I even understand it. So if I misspeak, let me know. This change from the PEOs into being the PAEs. And maybe help our audience understand what's happening, at least in the Air Force side.
So I can't speak to the other services, but what I will talk about a little bit is the program executive officers at the Department of the Air Force are now going to become portfolio acquisition executives. And what that means is that it's more mission focused, their portfolios and their chain of commands. Currently, the Air Force has probably approximately 9 specialized PAs right now, and the object and the rationale for the PAE changeover is more of a philosophical change. With our acquisition process, it's to again stay mission focused, but also cradle to grave responsibility for these acquisition executives and be able to manage the workforce that does their mission and to have that autonomy to go out and do the right things that we're asking them to do. Of course, which is you've seen in the Department of War, a lot of it is getting the product out to the warfighter sooner. So there's a lot more adaptability, there's a lot more speed to mission, and there's a lot more risk taking, and that's calculated risk that is going on. But these portfolio acquisition executives are going to have the opportunity to do that within the Air Force.
So is it fair to say if you're looking at doing business or doing business with the Air Force, particularly on the services side, I mean, how accessible? How do you get access to these PAEs? How many are there? Where are they based? How do you how do you get access to these folks?
Yeah, so, I don't know how many that each service is gonna have, so I apologize for that, but, just the same way you did with your PEOs is, get somebody that's got that Rolodex and the relationships and start walking in the doors. don't be afraid when you see those draft solicitations. Look who owns that. Go and talk to them. We always say follow the monies where the Air Force and the Department of War interests are, right?
Let's talk about a program I just have been around for a long, long time. AFCAP. Yeah, AFCAP is a, I guess, the Air Force's sister program to the LogCAP for the Army, right? The Air Force Civilian Augmentation Program, and the draft for AFCAP VI, the sixth generation, I think came out in April, right? Um, and I just saw that it's substantially bigger, the size and scope of the program. What do you see as what's going to be new? What do you expect to be new on AFCAP 6? And what lessons have they learned from AFCAP 5 and 4 and 3 that's going to make AFCAP 6, frankly, worth the time? I know a lot of industries kind of burn out on the LPTA nature of AFCAP 5. Is there going to be anything that addresses that?
Absolutely. So there was a draft RFP that came out in April where industry had the opportunity to respond and say what worked well, what didn't work well in the AFCAP previous to AFCAP 6 acquisition. So they talked about the seemingly going to lowest price technically acceptable offers when we compete the task orders throughout the life of the contract. How can we get away from that? How can we better support the desires of the government when it comes to the AFCAP mission across the world? So those are the kind of responses that the acquisition team is taken into consideration before the final request for proposal comes out. It's bigger only because the demand of that program has been so successful that they wanted to have enough ceiling to do the work they need to do globally. There is an opportunity in CONUS to have more small businesses support the things we do here in the US, but outside of the US, we're still looking at those large businesses to do the work that we need them to do. So when we talk about LPTA, there's pricing strategies that are looking at balance in those IDIQ task order competitions that'll go on throughout the life of the contract. And that is a way that they can look at deterring from going to the lowest price and getting the best proposal and the best value for the mission. But we always have to look, at the taxpayer dollars and make sure we're defending those appropriately. So the government's in a no-win situation sometimes here. They have to get the best value, but they also have to get the right price to spend those taxpayer dollars. So you will see a difference. You will see a difference in how they evaluate the pricing proposals as they go along. But in the end, the AFCAP 6 mission will keep growing and doing the great things that they've always done. So it's like I said, only because I was part of it, I'm a little I have my preconceived notions on the goodness of the program, but it is a great program and there's been great contractors supporting that. So I know there's a bigger industry base that's proposing this time, which will bring in more competition, and that's a good thing as well.
So let's go to the future, Nancy. We like the future of GovCons. We want to fast forward 3 years, which we think is a manageable, somewhat predictable horizon. So let's imagine we're in 2029. Talk a little bit about how you think Air Force services are going to look. Uh, Overall government acquisition. We're through it. We're through this administration. What looks like a pretty big budget ask, which some portion of that will go through. What does the Air Force acquisition look like, and what does programs like AFCAP? What do they look like in 2029?
So in 2029, we talk about the acquisition changes. We talk about adaptability, innovation, going more commercial like, taking more risks. That's what we're going to continue to see in the future. So as 2029 approaches, we're going to see different skill sets in the acquisition workforce, as well as we're going to see potentially different competitors in the industrial base that goes out there and supports the Department of War mission, specifically the Air Force mission. I believe APCAP 6 is going to keep doing the great things that they're doing. They may have shorter notice call ups for things that need to be taken care of to help in our environment to defend our nation, our allies across the world. So I will see. I look to see that continuing in 2029 as well. But definitely the speed and adaptability are two things that are really going to be different in the skill set of the workforce. And I say that, but industry sees these changes on the government side, and industry needs to be adaptable. They need to be flexible and they need to think differently too. As I said earlier in a comment, is the industry needs to get on board early and often and really understand the requirements to help when they get the contracts awarded to them. They need to understand how to move out fast, and they need to not break promises, and they need to deliver as well. So a lot of changes, but a lot of good changes are coming forward.
Do you feel like, from a market share, with this budget request, I mean, it looks like the Navy's going to get a favorable amount in space. How do you think the Air Force is going to wind up faring through this next budget cycle?
The Air Force is going to do very well. Space Force has got a lot of mission sets that are very critical to our nation's security, and a lot of the weapon systems out there rely on our space assets. So, space is going to continue to get money throughout the Department of the Air Force. Some of the things the Air Force is going to continue to be successful in garnering more money due to the current conflicts that are ongoing as well is we're going to continue to put more money in advanced aircraft, munitions, nuclear deterrence. Those missions aren't going away. We'll continue to see those in the funding, as well as when we talk about the UAS portfolio and how we continue to support that through the PAEs out there um, in their portfolios. The difference is going to be how does that money come in? The services are all going to ask for the money, and it could be one service or another that's garnering the monies. But when the portfolio acquisition executives support the Deputy Secretary of War, that those monies are going to be pulled together as programs such as Golden Dome and others.
Let me ask you this: what do you think Air Force is going to have a lot of the say around the UAS and this and the counter UAS, or is that going to go into some of the other services?
So right now, when you think of the UAS and the counter UAS and Golden Dome and other programs, it's interesting to put it as one service or the other, but definitely Air Force is going to be a major player in that. MDA's got a piece of that. Obviously, space. Nothing's going to happen without the intel from space and the support and the capabilities. So I think it's going to be pretty much a joint effort. I don't see any future fights going on in this country and any weapon systems being done in a vacuum with one service or another. But the writing's on the wall. You look at where all the money's flowing right now, and it's flowing a lot to the Navy and Space Force, but there's still going to be a big Air Force budget that's going to be necessary. And I always look at my Army counterparts and say, oh, you guys get killed all the time in the budget, but we're still going to need the Army to get a budget and be able to support as well.
I mean, Epic Fury has been an Air Force heavy operation, right?
Yep, for
They've
sure.
they've proven how important that air power is. So
You keep watching those weapon systems that we developed several decades ago, and they're still out there doing a great job.
yeah, it's incredible. What's the one word you would use to describe your gut feeling about the future of Air Force acquisition? What's one word you would use?
I would use adaptable.
Flush that out for me.
All right, our strategic environment is changing. We don't have the opportunity to be slow in our delivery of our weapon systems and our programs in the future. So, what we have to think about is how we can be adaptable, how we can look at getting the products to the warfighter sooner. It may not be the complete product, but it could be part of the software deliverable or part of the delivery of the weapon system so that we can continue to grow and fix the things that make them um, better for the warfighter and more protective of the warfighter out there. Uh, I think about adaptable, and I think also the skill sets that we talked about. We can't just rely on what somebody learned 20 years ago. What do you know today? How are you keeping up on technology? How are you looking at data analytics and utilizing that into your decision space in the future? And then it's also about taking those mission risks that we talked about earlier. Is We can't just sit there and say we're going to have a zero risk mission. There are going to be risks that we're taking, and we have to be adaptable enough to go out there and take them. And adaptability comes on both the government side as well as industry side. We can't sit on our laurels and do business the way we did in the past. We have to think differently. And that's why I chose the word adaptable.
I like it. Adaptable it is, Nancy. I love it. Look, what a fantastic career from GS2 to SES-3. It's amazing the impact you've had on national security and the Air Force, and so many, obviously, with your passion for leadership, the acquisition workforce across the Air Force. So it's a real honor to have you here with us today, Nancy, and to get some of your wisdom.
Well, thank you, Jake. I'm very humbled by the opportunities the Air Force has given me, but I'm even more humbled to have worked alongside many heroes and war fighters that gave me the strength and the courage and the empowerment to do my job. So appreciate it.
Great. And, back to the audience out there again, if you're doing business with the Air Force, thinking about doing business with the Air Force, it all comes back to a lot around the services and just understanding the acquisition process, knowing this kind of new landscape with the PAEs and that trust factor. Let's go back to how important that is, and having someone like Nancy that can help you speak the language, understand kind of the hot buttons and helping to solve problems. That's what it's all about right now, and it all comes back to that trust factor. So, Nancy, thanks for joining us. It's awesome to have you. Look forward to seeing you out in the industry here over the next year or so.
Thank you, Jake. It's been a pleasure. Have a great day.
And to our audience out there, I just say it, and I say it every week because I believe it, that the future of GovCon is happening today. So stay tuned next week. We're going to talk more about the future. See you next week. All right, so thanks for joining me on another episode of the Future of GovCon. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and some of the bold predictions. If you did, take a second, share it on your social media, subscribe on YouTube. If you have any ideas for future guests or topics you'd like to have covered, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always there, and you can always learn more about precision talent solutions at pts.careers. Look forward to seeing you next week on our next episode.